Welcome back to Atomic News, monitoring global chaos so you don't have to. While Trump keeps talking like this war is almost over, the region keeps proving the exact opposite. Iran is still throwing out chaotic retaliation across the Gulf, hitting oil infrastructure, airports, and U.S.-linked targets, while Washington scrambles to find allies willing to help clean up the mess. Just days ago, Trump was still saying the war against Iran was basically very complete. Now he is demanding that other countries, including China, Britain, France, Japan, and South Korea, help reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and he has even warned NATO of a very bad future if allies do not step up. That is not the language of a man wrapping up a quick victory. That is the language of someone discovering that starting a war is easier than managing its consequences, and Iran is making sure the consequences are felt everywhere. Reuters reports that since the war erupted on February 28th, Gulf states have suffered more than 2,000 missile and drone attacks affecting U.S. interests, oil infrastructure, airports, and military facilities. Tehran denies responsibility for some of the strikes, especially on Saudi oil sites, but the pattern is obvious. This is no longer a contained conflict. It is spreading through direct attacks, deniable attacks, and proxy pressure all at once. One of the clearest recent examples is Dubai. On March 16th, a drone attack ignited a fuel tank fire near Dubai International Airport, forcing a temporary suspension of operations before flights gradually resumed. Reuters called it the third such attack on the airport since Iran began targeting Gulf countries. That is not just a military message. That is an attack on regional commerce, civilian aviation, and the image of Gulf stability itself. And the proxy war is evolving too. Al Jazeera published video released by Iraq's Iran-backed Kataib Hezbollah, showing what it says was an FPV drone strike on the U.S. Victory base near Baghdad International Airport. The outlet said it was believed to be the first time the group had successfully used an FPV attack drone to skirt U.S. defenses. If that capability is real and repeatable, then the threat picture for American bases in the region just got nastier, cheaper, and much harder to manage. And here is the really ugly part. If Russian battlefield know-how from Ukraine keeps spreading through Iran and its proxy network, this problem can scale very fast. Not just Shahed-style strikes, but actual FPV doctrine, pilot training, strike coordination, and eventually fiber optic FPV systems that cannot be jammed by conventional electronic warfare because there is no radio control link to jam in the first place. You cannot jam a wire. You can only kill the drone, kill the operator, or realize too late that the threat has already evolved. Reuters reported that Trump said Putin may be helping Iran a bit, while also brushing aside Zelensky's offer to help the U.S. deal with drone threats over the Gulf. That is what makes Trump's swagger sound even dumber. Ukraine's drone war is now one of the main combat laboratories on Earth, and the lessons from it are valuable enough that countries in the region are actively looking at Ukrainian experience. Reuters says Kyiv has already sent teams to Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and a U.S. base in Jordan. And according to Time, even Benjamin Netanyahu sought talks with Zelensky about cooperation against drone attacks. So when Trump talks like Zelensky is the last person worth listening to on drones, he may be mocking the one country that has already lived through the future version of this threat. At the same time, Washington is being pulled deeper in anyway. Reuters reports that the U.S. is pressing allies to contribute forces for Hormuz security, while several of them are pushing back or refusing outright. Germany, Spain, and Italy have ruled out sending naval forces, while others remain vague and cautious. In plain English, Trump wants a coalition, but a lot of America's allies look at this war and see a bill they were never asked to approve, and the markets can read that just fine. Reuters reports that Brent has climbed above $100 a barrel as the Hormuz disruption traps roughly 15% of global oil supplies, while Washington burns through emergency tools, including sanctions waivers for Russian oil and a record 400 million barrel coordinated reserve release. That is what panic looks like when politicians keep pretending they are in control. So the real story here is simple. Trump sold this war as short, decisive, and manageable. Instead, Iran is still throwing punches across the region. Proxy groups are adapting, American allies are dragging their feet, oil is climbing, and the United States is discovering that even after bombing the hell out of Iran, it still cannot bomb away the consequences. While Washington gives Russian oil a temporary breathing window and the world gets dragged deeper into the Hormuz mess, today I want to talk about the real Achilles heel of Russia's war economy, the shadow fleet. This is not just a handful of rusty tankers wandering around the map. It is a parallel export system built to keep Russian oil flowing despite sanctions. False flags, opaque ownership, forged paperwork, old ships, weak insurance, and routes designed to stay just outside normal Western maritime enforcement. For years, this floating gray market helped Moscow keep selling oil and keep funding the war. For a long time, Europe mostly answered with paperwork and half-measures. Finland moved against Eagle S. Germany seized Aventin. France detained Boracay, then later intercepted Grinch, find it, and let it go. In other words, Europe was slowly waking up, but still treating the shadow fleet more like a legal irritation than a strategic target. Then the tempo changed. In early March, Sweden boarded one suspect vessel, then a second in under a week. Belgium went further and seized the tanker Athera, citing a false flag, false documents, and dozens of violations, then slapped it with a €10 million bail requirement. That is no longer symbolic enforcement. That is turning sanctions evasion into an expensive and dangerous business. On the American side, the key case was Marinera. The United States seized the Russian-flagged tanker in January after a prolonged pursuit, and Britain assisted the operation. London did not run its own tanker crackdown. But in the Marinera case, it clearly helped turn sanctions enforcement into a real maritime interdiction mission. And then come the sanctions Russia understands best, kinetic ones. Ukraine has already moved beyond simply striking depots and refineries. It has begun hitting the export chain itself, including named shadow fleet vessels. In late November, Ukrainian sea drones struck the tankers Kairos and Virat as they headed toward Novorossiysk to load oil. In December, another sea drone strike disabled the tanker Dashan, which Reuters described as the third shadow fleet vessel hit in 2 weeks. And later that same month, Ukraine expanded the battle space even further, striking the tanker Kindle in the Mediterranean with aerial drones, the first reported Ukrainian attack on a Russian shadow fleet tanker there. The pressure did not stop in the Black Sea or with crude tankers. In March, Reuters reported that the Russian LNG tanker Arctic Medegas was attacked in the Mediterranean, with Russian sources blaming Ukrainian drones and saying the vessel had suffered heavy damage after catching fire. Whether Moscow likes the term or not, that means even Russian energy shipping outside the Black Sea is starting to look vulnerable. At the same time, Ukraine has also been hitting the infrastructure that keeps this whole export machine alive. The Novorossiysk area, the Tikharetsk hub, Port Kavkaz, and other loading and supply nodes. Once the ships, the terminals, and the logistical arteries all come under pressure, the shadow fleet stops looking like a clever workaround and starts looking like a floating liability. That is why this fleet is Russia's Achilles heel. Oil cannot be teleported. It has to be loaded, documented, insured, shipped, and delivered. That means ships, crews, ports, terminals, paperwork, and sea lanes that are actually usable. Break that chain, and the Kremlin starts bleeding money. For years, Europe treated the shadow fleet like a nuisance. Now the response is evolving. First came sanctions, then short detentions, then seizures, and now, increasingly, kinetic pressure on the ships and the infrastructure behind them, because Russia's war machine runs on oil, oil runs on tankers, and tankers run on safe ports, valid documents, insurance, and open sea lanes. Break that system, and Moscow feels it fast. This is Professor Nuke, and this was Atomic News. Stay alert.
So stay tuned for all the wondrous views. You're watching Atomic News.